So we were crossing this river, probably about 5 to 6 meters to the side, going through the river. I was about 7th in line in the patrol. And as I was in the bottom of the riverbed, there was a command wire. We now know they were targeting me specifically. They knew I was the commander.
Really?
So they were waiting for me, and then they triggered it.
Steve's journey began with a childhood fascination for bikes. He built his first one at the age of just 8. Fast forward to his teenage years, and he was already racing mountain bikes in Devon. But life had other plans, and he joined the Royal Marines, serving across the globe in places like Northern Ireland, Iraq, and Afghanistan. In 2011, a tragedy struck when an IED explosion left him severely injured. Do you remember coming out of the coma?
Being in the coma was probably worse than being blown up, not in terms of pain. What happens as you start to come out of the coma,
So, really interested to know the transition that you made from Royal Marine soldier through to entrepreneur and founding LIOS Bikes. Was there a screw it, just do it moment that ultimately took you from the path that you were on in the military to what you're doing now?
I guess there was. Initially, I had no choice in being medically discharged from the Marines because of my injuries. But early on in my rehabilitation journey, my first physio, she had actually made it pretty clear that my military career was over, as was my sporting career. And I suppose it was at that moment where I had to decide what I was going to do with myself. You know, do I follow the well-trodden path of finance into the city like a lot of officers do? Or do I, screw it, just do it, set up my own business? So that's probably the first time, using your mantra, I did that.
Okay. And take me back to 2011, second operational tour for you in Afghanistan. You were leading 175 Royal Marines, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you remember from that?
I suppose I'm quite lucky. A lot of the guys and girls, they don't remember a lot of what happened when they get blown up during that day. Whereas I can remember right up to being carried onto the helicopter and the surgeons on board put me to sleep. So
okay, yeah.
I think that's probably helped me at the time deal with everything mentally, because I wasn't searching for those memories. I had them.
Yeah.
My brain was able to, work through them and deal with it. Speaking to a lot of friends that have been through similar situations, certain guys struggle because they're still searching for those memories of the brain is.
Yeah.
I kind of remember it all.
Okay. And I read, and I remember at the time, from watching the news and stuff, but the area you were operating was considered to be like the most dangerous square mile on planet Earth, or anywhere else for that matter.
Yeah, I think that was termed by Chris Terrell,
right?
The TV producer who's done a lot of work with the military and the Marines. He was actually, so just a quick bit of background. I was in command of Juliet Company 4-2 Commando, Helmand Province, and we were in what's called Nadi Ali North. My company's role was what's called ground holding. So we had a number of checkpoints that we had to secure and then run patrols for them to provide security to the local populations, let them go about their day. And essentially, we didn't have a lot of police or Afghan National Army attached to us, which made it a lot more difficult because you want an Afghan face. We didn't really have that. But we were that was the role we had, and that's what we did on a day-to-day basis. But we also had the ability, because of the size of the company, to mount discretionary operations outside of our area of operation.
Hey, Alex here again, and I wanted to ask you, what defining event are you doing in 2024? Something that's going to help you get from where you are to where you want to be. For me, it's going to be an obstacle course race with Spartan or Tough Mudder. If you'd like to do the same and help you develop the physical and mental strength to take on all of life's challenges in 2024, then I can help. Because Screw It, Just Do It and Spartan Tough Mudder are partnering up this February to offer you a big discount on the 2024 UK UK events. For Tough Mudder, podcast listeners can save 30% with the code ToughMud30. Any 2024 Tough Mudder UK event for both distances. The discount expires on the 29th of February and starts on the 1st of February. Just head to toughmudder.co.uk/events and enter the code at checkout. For Spartan, podcast listeners can again save 30% with the code ToughMud30 for any 2024 Spartan UK event, that's Sprint, Super and Beast, with a discount again starting on the 1st of February and ending on the 29th of February. Just head over to uk.spartan.com/EN. Both offers cannot be used in conjunction with any other offer or discount and excludes any of the other endurance race series or the Little Mudder. So join a community of normal individuals with an abnormal commitment to overcoming challenges that will test your physical strength, mental grit and aptitude for camaraderie. See you at an obstacle course race this year.
And so it gave my commanding officer another, what we call manoeuvre element. And so once every couple of weeks, generally by helicopter, but sometimes by armoured vehicle, we'd mount an operation outside of our company's area where we would provide security normally. And it was during one of these operations, we were tasked to essentially lure the insurgents to our location so that the task force helmman, the brigade, could mount a large offensive operation to secure a number of checkpoints on a canal. And part of that operation was to secure a village, which was on our sister company, Lima Company. That was their role. And then they were going to set up a temporary checkpoint for 6 weeks. So we flew in a day ahead of them, 2 days ahead of the brigade launch of the mission to find a temporary checkpoint and be prepared to be there for 7 days, basically luring the insurgents to our location to make the brigade main effort a lot easier. Hence the term most dangerous square mile on the earth, because we did a pretty good job of doing that. We succeeded in our mission, but tragically, unfortunately, a few of my guys got killed, one of my interpreters, and quite a lot of us injured, including myself.
Wow. And how many of you got injured?
So there was one of my troop commanders, one of my Marines were tragically killed, Ollie and Sam, their interpreter, Abdullah. In that blast, there were a number of other guys. JJ Chalmers, who's made quite a name for himself in the TV world now. Cass Little, again, he initially went into a bit of acting, so he's done quite well for himself. He was injured. There was a couple of other guys as well with some minor injuries that had to be casevaced at the time, but were able to continue with their careers. That was just one blast. The next day, I was injured along with my fire support team commander. We were both casevaced. He actually made a recovery and managed to get back out for the last bit of the tour.
Right.
Prior to that, so we had one of the guys got shot in an ambush, and so it was over a period of 6 days. There was a lot going on. Yeah.
And you say you remember everything that happened to you. So like with the IED, for example.
Yeah. So it was what's called a directional fragmentation charge. So whereas the majority of IEDs were buried in the ground, and as you step on, it's a pressure plate, and as you step on it, guys unfortunately get their legs blown off. This was actually buried in the side of a crossing point. So the crossing points over rivers and canals and streams, they're what's known as vulnerable points. So you steer clear of them because that's where the Taliban or the insurgents would sow the IEDs. So we were crossing this river, probably about 5 to 6 meters to the side, going through the river. I was about seventh in line in the patrol, 5 meter spacings in between each. And as I was in the bottom of the riverbed, 2 guys detonated. There was a command wire, so we now know they were targeting me specifically. They knew I was the commander.
Really?
So they were waiting for me, and then they triggered it.
No.
Yeah, so I'd had them in my sights kind of like a minute earlier. We knew that we were in an area where there was no civilians, but at that point they didn't pose a threat. So obviously under rules of engagement.
Yeah.
And then they did trigger. And we kind of, my company second in command actually told me months later when I saw him that later that day, our electronic warfare guys had picked up insurgent communications saying that they'd killed the local ISAF commander. And so they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And, they obviously did a good job.
Yeah.
Thankfully, they didn't kill me, but they got pretty close.
And you were, as you said earlier, you were induced into a coma.
Yeah, so whereas luckily I didn't lose any limbs. Mine was all down the right-hand side of my body, so right arm, big hole in my chest, just under my armpit. So at the time, my arm was kind of back, which is probably how I didn't lose my arm. I think if my arm was forward in front by the side of to the side of me, it probably would have taken my arm off.
Wow. Okay.
But I had a big hole in my chest, and then the body armor, my plate protected my lower torso, hole in my femur, fractured femur, and then I had a pistol on my right leg, so that saved a lot of my right leg. And then it kind of
Did it?
So the shrapnel peppered me for kind of armpit, top of leg, through the knee.
Yeah.
So it was my chest injury that was the worst, where it kind of torn through the rib cage, made a real mess of my insides. And so I was full of shrapnel. But they put me to sleep on the helicopter that picked me up, and they did initial operations in Camp Bastion, and then decided, look, you know what, we've done what we can here. We'll just staple him together and put him in an induced coma, and then let the UK deal with him when he got back. And by that point, my body everything was in a pretty bad state, and I ended up going in and out. Well, I ended up being in an induced coma for 3 weeks in the end. And despite having all my limbs, I was at the time the most critical patient in Queen Elizabeth Hospital.
No
despite
way.
Guys with 3 limbs missing around me in the intensive care. It was just because of all the what it had done to my insides.
Right. Wow. And do you remember coming out of the coma?
Yeah, I do.
Really?
Yeah. So interestingly, being in the coma was probably worse than being blown up. Now, not in terms of pain, but because it was an induced coma, your brain is often still functioning. And what happens is, since I've learned from the consultants, your body gets used to the drugs that are keeping you in the coma. So you start to come out of the coma. And this happens almost daily. And what happens as you start to come out of the coma, my eyes would open. I didn't know this was happening, but people would say, oh, his eyes open, then they closed again.
Yeah.
Your eyes open, your brain takes on the surroundings and turns into something completely different. And it's called intensive care psychosis. And it's heightened for combat injuries, because generally you've been in a situation where you have, day to day, you're fighting for your life potentially. And then your brain still is in that kind of fight or flight state. So as you come out of the coma, it takes on the surroundings. And so as an example, it took me probably a week after I came out of the coma to believe that I hadn't been captured and tortured by the Taliban.
No way.
So one of my memories was that I was being held captive in Kazakhstan in a tented hospital. And these nightmares are so real. They're so real. You can smell it. You can feel the heat.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And they were using me for propaganda. And then there was a point where they'd had enough, and they're like, right, we're going to kill him. And I thought, well, if they're going to kill me, I'm going to take one of them with me. And I start strangling this guy. So I'm recounting this story. And one of the surgeons was like, oh, yeah. Yeah, we didn't tell your families, but we were doing a routine operation on you, and because you're in a coma, we don't need to put you to sleep. And mid operation, I pulled the ventilator tube out of my throat, all the lines out of my neck, all the feeding lines and drains and drips and everything, and started strangling the anaesthetist.
I was just about to say to you, did you actually start?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my God.
And so that's just one of God knows how many. And so that one you could kind of say was specifically because of the military environment, but then there'd be some others that are really, really bizarre. And although I would go from one of these nightmares to another one that would be they'd be worlds apart. So one I thought was in a private medical hospital in Switzerland, and the hospital made its money out of having cameras filming injured patients, and it was all voyeurism and stuff.
The brain is a mad
and so
thing.
totally, kind of other ends of the spectrum. And but I couldn't rationalize it in the coma to say, don't worry, this is not real.
And were any of those dreams like recurring dreams, or were they like
No,
one-offs?
There was one, and it often ended up me being injured and being in some kind of hospital. And there was one, I'd always end up going back, or quite often, to this hospital that was on a chain link ferry. Totally bizarre.
Yeah.
And it would go back and forth across a patch of water. I couldn't tell you where it was.
Not Sandbanks then down here.
Well, yeah. This is interesting. Well, so I'd be occasionally whisked out of there, and I'd be like taken around corridors, And again, that's probably when I'm being moved in between, in between the intensive care and theatre for minor operations. But my eyes would open, and they're being pushed on the bed through, and that's the brain taking these things on again. But I could never get over this juk, 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 of the chain link ferry, constantly on this juk, 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 train link. And I didn't work out what it was until about sometime later. Of course, near the end of the tour, would have been near the end of the tour for the guys. I'd left hospital. I was in rehab at Headley Court, and I had to go back to Queen Elizabeth Hospital every 4 weeks to have a CT scan because they'd left a lot of shrapnel in my chest.
Right.
And on one of those visits, another one of my guys, he'd been shot through the chest, and I went into intensive care to visit him. And as I went in, I could hear this juk, 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 and I literally had this kind of like flashback of like, whoa, what is that? And it was actually coming from his bed, and he was on an oscillator, which is a type of ventilator. And I said to the nurse, I said, "What is that machine? What?" And I kind of explained everything. And it transpired initially for the first week I was on a ventilator, but because of the injuries to my right lung, nothing was healing. Right. And so they're like, we need to try something else. And apparently it was one of the first times I've ever tried it. An oscillator is normally used on babies. And what it does, it keeps the lungs at a specific pressure, but still breathes for you. So they're not expanding and contracting, which doesn't help recovery. So they put me on an oscillator. And because it had worked so well, they then took me off for a week, back on the ventilator, and then I came out of the coma. Anyway, this one of my guys, he was on this oscillator. They were doing the same thing for him because of the gunshot wound to his chest. And the juk 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 is the noise the machine makes. So that's what my brain is. That's why I kept having that. Yeah.
Wow. This story's unbelievable.
I've got so many. I could spend a whole podcast just talking about
we need a second episode.
Yeah, all the nightmares I had in the coma.
And how much of that was explained to you afterwards?
I think I had to go. To be fair, I suppose they just said, "Oh, that's just because of the coma. That's because of the drugs." There wasn't any detail. It was only when I started to ask questions and probe. And interestingly, somebody sent me an article. This was again a few months later. A journalist had written an article in the Times, and he'd been in. I can't remember what it was. He got ill from something random, and then ended up being really ill, and was in an induced coma. And he talked about intensive care psychosis and done loads of research into it. And so that then really opened up my floodgate for questions. So when I go back for my consultations, I'd be like, look, what does this mean? What does that mean? And then I got a much better understanding of it. It was a phenomenon. People in car accidents sometimes get it, but not as bad. It's if the body has been in, constant fight or flight beforehand, before something happens and before you're in a coma, that's when it's more likely. If you're driving down the road and have a car crash, you don't have car crashes every day, so it's not. Yes, it's a shock, but your brain isn't kind of going, well, you do, you wouldn't get back in that car and do it, but it's also why so many military personnel get it. I mean, there's this. Unfortunately, I think I hit a nurse because I thought she was trying to kill me, and one of my guys hit a nurse. There's a lot of. It is. Again, it was known at the time, as in if something happens during it, that the nurses and doctors were great. We're dealing with it. Yeah.
And has anything like that ever come back into your?
I don't think so. I've been quite lucky. I think certainly the guys that had physical injuries when you were at Headley Court, you both your physical and any mental stuff was dealt with. You're in a program of kind of 8 hours a day of rehab, 5 days a week. You do 3 weeks on, and then you get 3 weeks leave, which is basically to recover.
Okay, do you? Right, from the rehab.
Yeah,
because it's that intense.
Yeah. Wow, so you have. I worked it out. Each person would have about 12 different people allocated to them. The ones you'd see the most would be the exercise rehab instructors and the physios. But you'd have social workers, you'd have mental health practitioners, welfare officers, consultant, a doctor. There's about 12 people for each patient.
Didn't know that. Okay.
So there's an incredible amount of manpower looking after you with these very detailed programs every, kind of 30-minute chunks throughout the day. Part of that, irrespective of whether you show any issues of mental stress, you have to see
Yeah.
a mental health specialist. And so I do feel that a lot of guys that had physical injuries, perhaps anything mental, was caught early on because of that. And I think I probably fell into that category. I'm not saying guys that had physical injuries don't have mental issues, but I think I was quite lucky. And again, the environment's tricky because you're in an environment where everybody's there for the same reason. And so you're constantly talking about what you've been up to, what you're going through. And it was only when a year into my rehab, I had to go back into hospital to have another thoracotomy where they split my chest open, took a load of shrapnel out of my chest, and my rehab journey started again. And I had a new new exercise remedial instructor. We were chatting, and I was chatting about stuff, and she's like, how often do you think about Afghanistan?
Yeah.
I was like, normal like everyone else. And she's like, well, what's that in a day? I don't know, 40, 50 times a day? And she's like, that's not normal.
Really?
I was like, what? She went, no, that's not normal. And I just thought it was normal because you're chatting about it all the time. And so then I did have some, what's called EMDR. It's sort of like rapid eye desensitization whilst talking through your experiences. And again, I didn't feel I'd had any PTSD type issues, but I think if I had that, kind of just nipped it in the bud, whereas normally that process you don't get until a long time down the line.
Okay.
So I think I was lucky in that sense in terms of mental health.
And your rehab was like nearly 3 years, I read. Is that right?
It was, yeah. And again, although I had all my limbs, because of the chest injury, I had a shrapnel in my chest. I had one piece, 2 millimeters was my pulmonary artery. And so I wasn't allowing my heart rate to go very high. So it actually was quite frustrating when doing the physical rehab sessions because I was restricted. And there'd be guys with 2-3 limbs missing. And there I was, not able to do certain things because I couldn't kind of push myself so hard. And you kind of, it's tough. You're known as a four-limber in heavy core.
Okay.
And there's jokes. If you've lost a leg, that's a scratch. 2 leg, triple amputees. That's the kind of the hardcore currency.
Yeah.
It's a macabre way of dealing with it. But yeah, so I did actually find that tough when I couldn't kind of work to the level I wanted to be able to work to with my rehab. And it was like that for some time until 9 months in when I started puking up blood. Coughed up some shrapnel during a rehab session. And so, long story short, that's why I had to go back into hospital. And they were like, the consultants had hoped that the shrapnel in my chest would scar over and just become part of my body because it was so deep. They didn't think it would try and work its way out like a lot of shrapnel
I was literally going to ask you that, like, why do they leave it in
there?
there?
Yeah, because from what I understand, if it's fairly near to a surface, then it will work its way out eventually.
Yeah.
But you hear of Second World War vets that have got bullets inside them that just stay there their whole lives. And I think because of the chest injuries I'd received, from what the consultants had told me, very few people, if any, had survived. They looked at Vietnam, Korea, when I was in this coma to work out how to deal with me. And that's when they were like, let's just leave it in there and see what happens. And that's why I was monitored. I was having a CT scan every 4 weeks to see what would happen with the shrapnel, with the hope being that it would scar over and just become part of my body. When I started getting these issues, like, okay, this clearly stuff's moving inside. And so they could see a few big pieces, 20 mil wide type stuff, the big one near my pulmonary artery. So they said, right, we're going to have, well, they didn't say we're going to have to go in. They said, you're going to have to decide, you're going to have an elective.
Really?
Yeah. So this is probably a bit of a screw it, just do it moment. Because they'd left it to me, and I was like, well, why is it? Well, what do you recommend? And they were like, well, look, this is specialist surgery that we've never done before, and the risks are so high because we've got to split your body open you up, and go in and forage around for shrapnel, essentially. And I was like, okay, so what happens if I have another bleed and it doesn't stop bleeding? And they said, well, we'd have to do an emergency op. I said, well, would you prefer to do that or a planned one?
Yeah.
Well, clearly a planned one. I said, well, the decision's obvious. We need to go in.
How much of, that's a lot of weight on your shoulders, obviously, to make that decision. How much did you lean on other people for that decision, like family, friends, etc., or was that all on you?
You know what? No one's ever asked me that. And I have to, I'm now divorced from my wife at the time, so I must have discussed it with her, no doubt about it. But I think at the end of the day, it was that me rationalising it with the consultants and saying, what would you prefer to do, an emergency or a planned? And they said, well, planned every day of the week. And I said, well, for me, that was therefore a fairly obvious decision to make. But they were like, these risks are so high that you won't survive this. But at the same time, if we don't do anything, but they said, you have to make this decision.
Wow.
And so it ended up, I went back in. Thankfully, the op was very, they planned it on a Sunday when they don't normally operate. They had to bring in two specialist cardiothoracic surgeons, a big team. It was like a big, day of surgery. Afterwards, they actually thoroughly enjoyed it, because for them it was like experimentation. They were doing stuff where they had to tube down into my kind of airways through my throat that had a camera and a light and a torch on, and they split me open from my back and opened my rib cage up. So one was in there, and then the camera would see certain bits of shrapnel, but they couldn't see it from inside where they'd split my rib cage open and cut me open. And so they'd turn on the torch, and then they'd just literally, where they saw the light through my back, they'd then cut through. And so I think the surgeons quite enjoyed it.
I was going to say, that's like, kind of stuff that they hope to get to be able to do, but it's outside of the usual.
Obviously, they did amazing. They ended up, and going in for 4 big pieces of shrapnel, they actually found 15 pieces. 5 years later, I coughed up another bit of shrapnel.
How long ago?
5 years later, so that was 2017.
Years.
I was ill for a couple of weeks, and I just thought I had like some kind of man flu.
Yeah.
And I ended up coughing for a bit of shrapnel.
And when you were talking about the sizes of the shrapnel, what does that like?
So that bit was kind of 6 mil wide, so not, kind of, it's small, but that's so what, again, we worked out. I'd been ill because it was obviously still in my air, within the kind of chest cavity, and it was working. My body was trying to get rid of this foreign object, and so I just felt really lethargic, knackered all the time, couldn't do anything, whilst my body's trying to get rid of this foreign object. And then it had obviously over a period of time made its way into an airway, and I coughed it up.
Wow.
And it came up in this kind of like biscuity type substance that I've never seen before, part of whatever is going on in my chest.
Yeah.
And so then I kind of phoned my consultant and went, look, I've just coughed this up. But I've been ill and you're not right. We need to get straight. So I had CT scans and they're back in. And they were like, yeah, amazing. And the next day I was fine.
The next day?
Next day I was fine.
So the body literally just got rid of it.
Yeah.
And did you find you've had plenty of time to kind of look back on that, physically or mentally harder, or just all hard?
Which bit?
So like the rehab, like a couple of years, and then you have an episode like that afterwards.
Yeah, I guess the physical. What was hard initially, as I said before, that first kind of 9 months where I wasn't allowed my heart rate to go very high.
Yeah.
I did struggle with that. I struggled with not being able to work at the rate I wanted to with the other guys that were in rehab with, because you've been, and a lot of them were, we had, at that point it was a particularly rough tour. Herrick 14. There was, at one point there was 17 from my unit alone. So, although there was no hierarchy whilst you're in rehab, we still, we were working together. You were all kind of at another common, yeah. And so when I couldn't work I still wanted to be able to lead by example and push myself in rehab. So that first 9 months was hard physically. And I think because there were so many guys from the unit there, although there was no hierarchy, I still felt I had a leadership role. Yeah. And then, like I say, it was all first name terms, but, I was a major. There was a couple of captains from our unit. There was a load of sergeant, a load of corp. We almost kind of had a rank structure, although we didn't.
I was going to ask you, so it was interesting you brought that up. Yeah, okay.
But we then, and so we'd make sure we'd always have a marine night every week where the welfare officers would take us out for a meal, and so there's a lot. And so I think I probably, in hindsight, I put on a much braver face because I still felt that I had a leadership role. Yeah. And then wine forward a year, have this operation, I'm in hospital for a month, I come back to Headley, and a lot of the guys have moved on. There was very few of, kind of 4-2 Commando guys there. And I guess I could then start my own rehab journey. And that's when the ERI at the time, she kind of said to me, you need to get your head checked because 40 times a day isn't healthy. So.
And at what point was it early on that you had a conversation with, I think it was one of the physios, and it's like, what life looks like beyond this?
I think one of the reasons I got out of hospital pretty quick and out of the intensive, so I was in intensive care for 5 weeks, 3 weeks in the coma, just under. And then I was on the ward for a very short period before they released me to Headley Court. And they just couldn't believe that, from being in a coma, not to do anything for yourself, my kind of progress in the first few weeks was so rapid. And I think I was a bit delusional in the sense that I was going to get fit enough to go back and be back out with the guys in Afghan.
Yeah.
And that initially,
that's natural, I think, isn't it?
Really pushed me to kind of get better. I then got to Headley Court, and in the first week, and I was, you kind of meeting all the people that are going to be working with you, and the physio. She only ended up being my physio for a couple of weeks, and I had someone else for the whole time. But she was kind of one of the senior physios, and she's excellent. And I was chatting away saying, oh, well, I used to do triathlon and mountain biking and cycling for the Navy, and I used to do this and race nationally and this, and I'm a company commander and I'm going to do it. And she kind of said to me, she goes, you need to know something. She said, you're never going to race or compete at that level again. It probably wasn't quite as blunt as this, but this is how I remember it. And she said, you also need to know your military career is over.
And she delivered it like that.
I remember, I'm retelling it like that. It probably wasn't quite as blunt as that, but it was certainly in that first week. And it certainly made me think. And actually, it was the best thing that anyone could have said to me. And I don't think, maybe she thought I could take it, because I know a lot of guys, I think they struggled for a long time thinking they were still going to have a career. Whereas it took me 48 hours to get my head around it. And then I immediately went, right, okay, what am I going to do?
Did you?
So from the first week of being at Headley Court, I was already thinking about, okay, what's next?
And were there different options going through your mind, or was it straight kind of reaching back into the past and going, this is what I'm passionate about and this is what I want to do?
So I guess that came off. It was the initial, I had a young family. It was like, okay, I need to find something where I'm going to earn money. And it was, okay, I started, you start looking at London, you're like, okay, what am I going to do? And it's, potentially whatever it might be, business, consultancy, finance, that type of stuff. Because you kind of think, well, actually, I need to earn money.
What skill set have I got?
Yeah, and what can I do? Well, it's leadership, it's management, it's that type of stuff. What is there?
Yeah.
And you start looking at that, and, you kind of realise it involves, wearing a suit, commuting, probably being on a train, long hours, not seeing your family. And I was like, you know what? And moreover, I wanted to run my own diary and be my own boss.
Yeah.
And I think I can't remember the time frame, but I kind of came to the realization that wasn't for me, that wasn't going to work, and that I needed to do something myself. And then that's how the idea evolved. You start reading all the business books and, the stats, whatever it is, 70% of businesses fail in the first 3 years. And I thought, well, if I've got any chance of this being successful, it's got to be something I'm passionate about. If I'm not passionate about it, I'm just going to give up anyway, because the failure rate is so high.
Yeah.
What am I passionate about? Well, it was this cycle industry. Can I do something? And so the idea kind of evolved whilst I was in rehab. And I was lucky I had the time outside of the rehab. The work you do, you'd finish at 4, so you still, you got hours in the day. And you also had that period in between your rehab sessions when you're back at home. So I'm like, well, I'm still getting paid here. Now is the time to try and set this up so that as and when I get medically discharged, hopefully the business is up and running. And I was lucky to that's how it worked out. So
you went like literally all in on that one idea. There weren't like a whole bunch of things that you were kind of juggling a few plates.
No. And I think it probably to the surprise of my wife at the time, I did go literally all in. Before she knew it, I had like prototype frames turning up and all sorts of stuff, and I was spending my compensation money on bits. And I think she was a bit like, well, this is like full on here. I'm like, well, I've got to make this work.
Yeah. And did you bootstrap that to start with, or did you? Because I remember one of the first podcasts I ever made with my podcast agency was for Ex-Forces Enterprise.
Oh yeah.
And that was like servicemen and women coming out who wanted to start their business, and there's like seed funding, there's mentoring, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So I started just before they were around.
Okay.
So the heropreneurs who were kind of like they were more mentoring rather than kind of finding kind of finances or anything like that. So no, I used compensation money initially. As you say, to bootstrap it. Yeah.
And what was the vision? Because I maybe rewind a little bit to start with, because we were talking earlier about you were going to go to like Cardiff Uni.
Yeah.
which is my hometown, but you decided to join the military. So kind of rewind back to that phase and what initially was the catalyst for you wanting to join the military?
So I think, yeah, I'd always been into outdoor activities, sport, and early on I started mountain bike racing, late 80s, early 90s, when it was a really new discipline. And me and my dad would go to the dump, and my dad still does it now, although you can't get away with buying as much. But we used to buy bits, and he'd buy broken washing machines, TVs, videos, and bikes, and we'd fix them and then sell them, and he'd give me a bit of money or whatever.
Yeah.
And then when it came to my GCSE technology projects, I built an electric bike. It was actually a trailer that pushed the bike along. You could attach it to any bike. And I used a car starter motor as the motor and a car battery in this trailer that pushed the bike along. This is
cool,
early
man.
90s.
Yeah.
And then, so at this point, I still, wasn't have any kind of inclinations to join the military. I've been in the Air Cadets, but it wasn't like, I'm going to be in the military. But I really enjoyed outdoor activities and sport, kind of, captain of all the teams and all that kind of stuff. The Duke of Edinburgh, 10 tours. So there was something in me outdoorsy. So I suppose I was kind of thinking, is there like an outdoor activities type role for me? But there was no such course at university at that time.
No.
And so I was destined, I was thinking, well, it's kind of engineering, because I was doing maths, physics, technology A-levels. And again, I built another electric bike for my A-level technology project and went on to Young Inventor of the Year stuff. And I thought, well, engineering. So I applied to do Masters in Engineering at a number of universities, Cardiff being my first choice. And that's where a couple of my mates ended up going. But it was during the last, my upper sixth year of A-levels, a friend of mine who was a year older, he joined the Marines. And I went to his passing out parade. And I went down, and I just remember the video of his passing out parade, watching him and then marching around. Not so much the marching, but the video of him crawling around, not with the bayonet between his teeth, but that's how you visualise it. But he's crawling around in the mud. That actually really appealed to me. And I came away, and I went straight to the recruiting office. And he joined as a Marine. And I just thought, well, you can join as a Marine officer. And I just thought officers did exactly the same as Marines. They just got paid more money. Didn't really have a clue about the leadership and management bit. I just thought, well, I just passed my driving test. I thought, I want a decent car. So I went to the recruiting officer and said, right, I want to be an officer in the Marines. And the recruiting officer, once he'd stopped laughing at me, he was like, well, go to university, get a degree if you want to join as an officer. And I was like, why do I have to go to university? And he said, because no one gets in without a degree. And I said, well, your literature says that you just need A-levels. So can I at least give it a go? And if not, I'll go and do my engineering degree. And he went, okay, whatever. As it happens, I was commissioned straight from school. So didn't go. So that's the kind of, So although I had the place to go and do masters in engineering, I ended up joining the Marines as an officer straight from A-levels. Hence the kind of very different path. But the whole the cycling thing, I guess, was in there somewhere.
I was interested to know then so with regards to the vision that you had, did you have an end goal? Were you thinking what's going to differentiate the company that I want to make compared to what we grew up with in the 80s and the 90s, etc.?
Yeah, I suppose I didn't have an end goal, but I had a goal of succeeding. And again, when you do all your kind of research, and so I'd realised it was at the time it was all about the USP, unique selling point. You've got to have a unique selling point, which is kind of you do, but I kind of have a slightly different theory on that now, but that's a different topic. At the time, it's like you've got to be different, otherwise it's just not going to work. Now, clearly, there's plenty of bike brands out there, so me starting up a bike brand, that wasn't enough. I needed to be different. There's no way I could compete with the big global brands. So I thought, well, at the time, bike fitting was starting to become more and more popular as people recognised the benefits, starting with British cycling, the Olympics and so on. And then it kind of filtered down to mere mortal. Initially, it was all about high performance, getting those marginal gains. And the bike fit plays a crucial part in that. But then I think people realised that you can go on a bike ride and people would be really uncomfortable and just thought, well, that's just part of it. Yeah. But actually, no, it's not. Being comfort and efficient is actually what everyone should enjoy. Yeah. And the bike fitting process, that's what the bike fit does for you. And so I went down the bike fitting route. So I did a load of research into companies that had bike fit equipment, bike fit courses, and chose one called Retool, based in Colorado. They've been going a couple of years at the time. They use 3D motion analysis. And very lucky, Help for Heroes paid for me to go and do the courses.
Amazing.
And then the Marines paid for me to go to America and do work experience. With a guy that had been going for 20 years. He was like a pioneer in America for bike fitting.
Amazing, yeah.
So what I realised, so I wanted to combine that bike fitting process with the customization of the bike to kind of differentiate myself, essentially.
Yeah, and both the course and the experience were exactly what you were hoping for.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
I'm also, I mean, because I guess I now look back and think, right, blimey, even when I was raised, I used to ride for training, my road bike was just so poorly set up, but I just put up with it.
Yeah.
I didn't know that now at the time. You just kind of, it is what it is.
Exactly, yeah.
So yeah, now he's 10 years on, so more than that, 11 years.
And how did you get your first customers?
So that was tricky. I owe a lot to my first ever customer. She's now bought probably 3 or 4 bikes.
Really? It's that lifetime value of that customer.
Yeah, but it's more than that. And she,
yeah,
I will say her name. I'm sure she won't mind. Francie Clarkson, Jeremy's ex-wife, and she was, incredible supporter of injured folk. Patron for Help for Heroes.
Okay.
And when I was at Headley Court, there was one of the exercise rehab instructors set up a team called Team True Spirit. And he was getting loads of injured people to go and do an Ironman triathlon up in Bolton. And there was a group of people, there was all sorts of different injuries. There's quite a few Marine guys doing it. And I couldn't, because of I wanted to be part of this, but I couldn't. So I said, look, I'll come along, be a mechanic or drive the minibus or take photo. And I did all that. And to raise the profile of the team, Mark Elliott, one of the founders, well, although there was Bryn and Emma Parry, but he was also kind of the third founder that they don't really talk about. But Mark Elliott's still working for Help for Heroes. And he kind of liaised with all the celebs and VIPs. He kind of reached out to Francie and said, could you be part of this? And she helped raise the profile through her media contacts and so on. Yeah. And she did the Ironman. Anyway, we're chatting away and she's like, so what's your story? And I told my story. And this is at the point where I was, just thinking about setting up the business, but I'd had business cards made and everyone took the mickey out of me because I had business cards, but no business. And again, you look back and you think, what an idiot. You look like a complete... However, I always tell this story quite often. It was probably the best thing I ever did because I had a business card and I said to her, this is me. This is what I'm doing. And she said, I might buy a bike. And I think it was a throwaway. I thought it was a throwaway comment. Because at the time I hadn't fully... This was just before I'd had the coughing up shrapnel incident and I'd gone back into hospital. And so I gave her the card and that was that. I helped out the weekend. They did the race and I'd kind of was still just thinking about it. I then go back into hospital for a month and it's kind of on the back burner for a bit. That was kind of the back end of the summer. Wind forward, I then had my operation August, September, back into recovery. January, I get this phone call. And it's Francie, and she's like, stupidly, I've signed up for another Ironman, and I'm thinking perhaps I need a new bike. Now, she probably didn't need a new bike. I think she was essentially wanting to help me out.
Do you?
But I hadn't progressed the business idea anymore whatsoever.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, right, okay. Well, I had to go back into hospital and explain the whole story. And she's like, oh, right, well, the event's in July or whenever it was. I'm keen. And I kind of thought, she's just saying it. February. She's back. How's it going with the... I was like, shit, I'm going to have to do this. So probably another screw it, just do it.
Yeah,
but it was her pushing. And I was like, bugger, I need to get on with this because she wants a bike. And so that really pushed me.
Real catalyst, yeah.
Yeah, real catalyst. Yeah. And she's my, the first ever customer. And then she took an hour and a half off her bike time. I think she probably did more training as well, but I like to say it's all down to the bike.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then she was really instrumental in introducing me to, a very good friend of hers who, when I launched the business, they had a design consultancy. They designed, kind of retail outlets for top brands, Gucci and so on. They have a pop-up shop in Marylebone where they'd test products. And they had a shop front on the high street, and they said, right, you can have that for a week, and God knows how much it would have cost.
Yeah, I was going to say Marylebone. Yeah,
and it's a big shop frontage and inside the whole lot, and that's where I launched, and then so they were. That was my first customer, and we're still very good friends now.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Do you think that was literally the breakthrough right at the very start, or otherwise?
Yeah, I think there's and with everything, there's a bit of luck, but you've got to make the most of your luck as well.
And you've got to be aware that luck is actually smiling at you at the time, haven't you? Like ears open, eyes open, and sees it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. What's the biggest setback? You say 10 years now. What's been the biggest setback that you've experienced during that last decade?
It's probably one I won't go into massive detail with, but I kind of went into semi-business with I kind of trusting people at face value. So I think I've in the Marines, I'm sure it's in any military, but particularly in the Marines, the training is it's one of the longest, arduous that you can join straight from Civvy Street in the world, and everybody talks about that stat. What you get out at the end of the training pipeline is someone, whether it's an officer or a Marine, they've been through the Commando tests or the Commando course, the Commando phase, and you are a Commando. And there's an intimate bond and trust that everyone has amongst each other. So as you're about to deploy, you might have a new joiner, but it doesn't matter that he's not been part of the unit. You trust each other intimately straight away, because at the end of the day, your life is in their hands, and that's proven day in, day out over the last 20 years. When I left or was medically discharged, every single person I met, I immediately trusted.
Right.
And my wife now, she even jokes about when I meet new people, she's like, "Oh, have you given them your bank details and told them all about your pen?" Yeah, everything.
Because, so trusting.
Yeah, I was too trusting of people, and that was probably my biggest mistake. I wanted all the details.
No, but that can get replicated again and again as well, can it? And I'm sure you're not the only one.
But then it's unfortunate now, because I've probably gone a bit too far the other way, whereas it's really difficult to let go, because not that I don't trust people, but it's like, can they do it to what the level devolving down is really tricky for me now.
No, I get that. And so looking back, learning side of it as well, what piece of advice would you give to anyone to help them get from where they currently are to where they want to be? Like, what kind of things were holding you back that you think you could help those people break free of procrastination and actually just do the bloody thing?
I suppose you've got to have faith in yourself, and it's the whole. I know it's cliched, but you've got to have some serious dedication and resilience. I get up at 5 every day, do 12 hours a day, and it's still not enough. Some would argue, well, you're doing something wrong. My point is, in the current climate, I don't like to take on more people until I know I can definitely pay for them, whereas others would say, we've got to take risks, take them on, your revenue would grow and so on and so forth. But without that, 10 years on, if I didn't have the dedication, I wouldn't be doing those. You'd give. So I think that's the biggest one, is you've got to, I guess, have that belief and dedication to not give up.
And what's the one thing that you think you had that took you from where you were at that rehab to where you're now, like 10 years later as the owner of a business?
Communication. I don't know, I may be coming across rubbish from this, so I shoot myself in the foot by saying communication.
Think so.
But what I mean by that is the little things, just signing off on an email, salutations, being polite, being able to, and spell check, just reread the email before you send it, letters, telephone calls. Whenever you first time you meet someone, making that first impression, that's all communication in my book, whether it's a conversation, whether it's an email, whether it's a telephone call, a text message, a social media post, whatever it is, that's all communication. And essentially that's you selling your business. So if there's a load of typos, if you haven't made an effort, then you're not going to succeed. And I always come back, at the end of the day, that's probably, communicate. And I think I probably learned those skills, particularly as an officer. There's many different ways that you have to kind of communicate. And I guess the importance of that communication, particularly when it comes to writing and getting it right, succinctly, getting your vision, your mission. We have missions, we have intents, we have scheme of maneuvers in the military, and all of that, as we know, mirrors across the business. And so, but that is all at the end of the day communication, about communicating your vision, communicating your mission.
Do you think, it sounds like it does, but that massively helped you, the knowledge that you got from the military, like the systems, the processes, the discipline, is for you personally translated really well into business?
Yes, definitely. But then a lot of people would say, I still don't see myself as being successful in business. And again, my wife says to me, well, why not? Ridiculous.
Well, if you're still around in 10 years' time,
well, that's it. And she's like, well, you're still going.
Percentages are going to be tiny, aren't they?
I suppose I think, okay, that is, and I've made my own brand, and there's people respond, and all this kind of stuff. But and then I suppose I'd have to define what success is for me. But definitely. I was very lucky in the Marines, particularly as an officer. You generally change job every 18 months to 2 years. And I did jobs in HR, in media, in training, in operations, in intelligence. And so each time you're learning something, and every one of those attributes I've definitely been able to kind of mirror across into my small business life. And they've, kind of helped, no doubt about it.
Question I always ask is, are you currently where you want to be?
No, but then probably most people would say that.
Yeah.
If you were aware,
especially if you're an entrepreneur. But if you're not an entrepreneur, maybe you're comfortable.
Maybe you're happy with your lot. And I've got, although I've got issues with my health, I'm still here. That's kind of the biggest one. I've got a roof, able to provide food and water. Those, the kind of key bits are ticked, so that's great. Yeah. But I'm not personally where I want to be. I'll always be striving for something that, I can improve in the business life, in my own physical life. Well, actually, I've set myself a goal this year of doing the biggest downhill mountain bike race in the world, because it's completely bonkers.
Where's that?
It's called the Mega Avalanche. You start at 3.3k up on a glacier in Alpe d'Huez.
Oh yeah, know it. Yeah, been there. Yeah,
and
okay.
You start on the glacier in the snow. 1,600 mountain bikers. It's carnage.
1,600 all starting in like waves.
Yeah, just getting down is a kind of is a mission, let alone in any speed. And so, I'm doing that. I won't be super fast, but I want to get down.
You can still compete. You're happy competing.
Yeah, and it's a goal, because it's going to take some training, and so I'm still pushing myself.
I love it. That's brilliant. And do you get the time to look back and go, if I hadn't joined the military and if that hadn't happened to me, I actually wouldn't be doing something that I'm passionate about? You could still be in the military, or you could have gone and got a job in the city and be working in finance. Do you look at that as just, it's the way the world is gone, and I take it for what it is?
I do, to be fair. There's constant crossroads, forks, whatever you want to say. Yeah. And me getting blown up put me on a very different trajectory, completely different. I suppose it's only, and I was lucky. By the time I was medically discharged, I'd done 17 and a half years. So I call it 18, round up. Yeah. So it was a good stint. Yeah. I was very fortunate. Joined at a time where, it was mid-90s, going into, did a lot of action, essentially. Northern Ireland, Kosovo, Sierra Leone, Iraq, Afghanistan. Loads of really interesting stuff. Yeah. And so, although I had a full career, I wasn't bitter about being medically discharged. I think that's very different for guys that perhaps have got injured on their first job out of training. I totally get that. They're like, well, my career hasn't even started and it's over. That's got to be really hard. I wasn't in that situation, so I was lucky in that sense. And I think because of that experience as well, I was probably able to deal with. I had the resilience built up over those tours. And each time, Northern Ireland, it was at the end of the normalisation process. So although there was risk, the risk is reduced. Kosovo slightly more. And each time I went on an operational tour, it ramped up, it got more and more serious. And so I was very lucky in the sense that I was still learning, but it was like progressive.
Yeah.
It was like this ladder I was growing in conflict as it got more and more gnarly.
Yeah.
But it therefore, when it got to the point that I actually was in the situation that I was in, when you are literally fearing for your life every day, you don't know if the next step out your base is your last one. I'd had all the previous stuff to prepare me for it, and then going through injury and rehab, I do feel I was lucky in that sense. Whereas I know it's harder for younger guys, and I could be completely wrong. That's my theory. They may say otherwise, but that's kind of my theory on it.
Have you ever had the chance to speak to like young recruits, new recruits about your experiences? Because I know you've done speaking.
Yeah, and funnily enough, and one of my proudest moments was my son has just joined Lympstone.
Has it? It's really funny because my next question was, what is your proudest moment? You've literally just...
Yeah, so, and a lot of it thanks to Mike Scanlon, who we mentioned earlier, who's still serving, good friend of mine. And he's been kind of mentoring along with another friend of mine, Rolly Brading, won't mind me mentioning him. He's the head of Royal Navy Physical Training. So my son's had quite a bit of a leg up, but his aim was to join straight from GCSEs as a Marine. So he's super young.
How old is he now then? Like 16,
Yeah,
17?
he's just 17, yeah,
Wow.
literally. Just
Same age as my daughter, okay.
Yeah, and so he kind of...
Wow.
I don't know how hard it was when I did it, but I was 2 years older.
Yeah.
And so... Yeah, to get through the candidate preparation course, which is what used to be called the Royal Marine Potential Recruit course, that was super tough in itself. He's the youngest person to get through that, and he's down there now, on kind of getting thrashed.
Proud dad moment.
So that's talking. So where did we come to that? Recruitment. We started talking about recruitment, didn't we?
Yeah. That's amazing. That is amazing. And I always kind of when you think of people like that who know what they want to do at a young age, I'm always like jealous of people like that because I didn't have a clue. I had a vague idea, and then went off in a completely different direction.
Yeah, it is, and I feel for my daughter Lily. In fact, where LIOS Bikes comes from, Lily and Oscar. We didn't even mention that. That's another reason why I never gave up.
Yeah,
you name a business after your kids, you can't give up on them, or the business, I should say.
Both.
So whereas poor Lily, she's not sure what she wants to do. Whereas Oscar's been like, no, this is what I want to do.
How old's Lily?
She's only a year younger, so she's just doing her GCSEs now.
Okay.
So she's like, I don't want to go to university, do I want to do a course, do I want to do A-levels, do I want to do this, do I want to do that? And I get it, it's tough. And
it is.
You've got to decide now because depending on what A-levels or college courses you determines. And so it's a tricky one. So she's in a very different situation to Oscar, who years ago, out of massive surprise for me, turned around and said, I want to join the Marines when he was like 12. And he didn't show any attributes whatsoever.
Really?
I don't mean it nastily. He wasn't interested in the kind of stuff I thought you need to be interested in.
Yeah.
And I just thought, it's just, he's 12.
Yeah. It's a phase.
Yeah. 6 months, a year later, still I want to join them. I thought, okay, all right, I'll start. I wasn't pushed and I wasn't stopping. It was I thought, okay, what have you thought about joining the cadets? No, I'm not interested. I'm like, okay. Have you thought about doing Duke of Edinburgh Award scheme? You get to kind of learn how to navigate and you go around doing, I call it yomping, but, camps and all that stuff. And no, not interested. Right, okay. What do you think is going to be I said, it's not Call of Duty. It's very different. Yeah. Anyway, and I just thought, eventually I had to force him to join the cadets. And then COVID hit, and it was a shame because it kind of, obviously the training couldn't go on. But there was quite a long period where I just thought, is this going to, but he stuck. He kept, I want to do it, I want to do it, I want to do it. And then I think the turning point was when he'd said, because initially he said, I want to join as an officer straight after my A-levels. And I think that's when I was a bit worried. I'm like, you need to really be...
Yeah.
These guys, most of the guys are probably 22, 23. They've done a degree and a job, and then they join as an officer,
difficult
to compete.
Physicality as well. Yeah.
And he's like, actually, I don't want to join as an officer. I just thought I had to do that because that's what you did.
Right.
And I was like, not at all. This is about you, your life. You've got to do what you want to do. And he's like, I want to be a Marine and I want to be a sniper. I went, mate, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
If I'd had my time again, I might have joined as a Marine, and that's exactly what I wanted. So I totally get it.
Yeah.
I said, if that's what you want, I can now help and support to get you to that point, or certainly to get you into the training cycle.
And interesting then, so knowing a little bit about your story now after an hour, and you kind of referenced Call of Duty there, and we've talked about like the injuries you had. How much of a kind of reality check conversation do you have with your son? Do you have you had it? Do you have it? Do you need to have it?
So Yeah, good question. I think because of what he was only little, but he was 4 when I was injured, but he can remember it, and whereas Lily was too young to understand what was going on. He was more kind of aware of the situation and of my rehab and my recovery and stuff I've done since. So he's fully aware, and he's met a lot of my mates with 1, 2, 3 limbs missing. So he's literally grown up in the environment of people getting shot and blown apart. So I do think he is acutely aware of the risks of what can happen. But you raise a point that I was actually chatting to someone the other day about in the whole kind of Call of Duty generation, whereas there must be a lot of people that just think that is what armed conflict is like. And you just go around, but it's even in TV and movies, people get shot. People get shot, and then they brush it off and they crack on. Yeah, it's not like that. And so, I'd never really thought about it until recently. There must be a lot of people joining the military, thinking that it's actually you can get shot in the arm. That's fine. You just crack on like it's a scratch. Well, no, it doesn't work like that. And so, my son Oscar, I think because he's been around it, he is definitely aware of. When it goes wrong, it's not very nice.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But I do now think, blimey, the majority of this generation, it's not like the TV, it's not like movies, and it's definitely not like computer games.
No, but and I think that's to your point is literally if you are that age and you've only ever known social media. The internet and being able to access, those kind of movies and Netflix series, then maybe it's a reality check. But for someone like your son who's grown up and seen your friends in that environment, then it's a really interesting angle to go in with your eyes wide open.
Exactly, he's gone in with his eyes wide open.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think he's probably, he's probably...
And you didn't not want him to go down that road?
No, I didn't. I was I wasn't. I would never have tried to persuade otherwise. And it wasn't me pushing him initially. It's only been, and then it's been in the last year and a half where I've really, and not pushed, but actually you probably pushed, but supported, rather than if he wasn't doing certain, we have to look. Come on, and it'd be like getting him up early, just getting him acclimatized, not because. It's a big culture shock when you start at 16 or 17, and I know you've had a few guys on here that joined at that age. Yeah. But again, I think this generation is, and I don't mean it demeaningly, is different. And so he's been ironing his school uniform since he was 12.
I love that.
Yeah. And so I'd get him up. We were doing a phys. We started my wife. She's much more into her phys than me, and more capable and better at coaching. He wasn't going to listen to me, and so she started coaching him initially. And we'd be getting him in the sea at 6 a.m. because she does cold water sea swimming.
Brilliant.
It's all about and so we're trying to condition him from a young age, very young age, for this moment. And so now he's there, hopefully. Despite the fact he's super young compared to some of the guys that might be up, 33 years old, they've had a whole career already when they joined the Marines. But he's at least been conditioned, and you could almost argue because he hasn't had any other life, he might even be a better prospect, because at the end of the day, the first 10 weeks of training, they're stripping you back so they can start with a raw kind of recruit.
He hasn't got any of that.
He hasn't got any of that stuff, and he's stripping back because he hasn't got a house, he hasn't got a mortgage, he hasn't had a job. He's done little jobs, you know what I mean? He's not. Yeah. And so he's already at that kind of raw stage, which I think is probably, if you can withstand, if your body is robust enough to withstand the training, then it's probably, a great age to start.
I feel we could go on. I haven't even touched on the racing, and I want to talk more about like your past athletic endeavours as well. But maybe there's an episode 2 we can talk about there. But look, Steve McCulley, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.
People want to find out more about LIOS, want to connect with yourself, best way?
LIOSbikes.com is a website. All our social media is at LIOS Bikes, LIOS Bikes. we've just actually hardly spoken about the business, have we?
Kind of the last third.
Yeah.
About how you got started and
No.
obstacles overcome. But
no, anyone looking for a carbon or titanium bike, LIOS bikes.
Fantastic. And given that we're recording this early 2024, what are your kind of goals for the business for the rest of this year then? What are you looking at?
This year we're about to launch, we've just not long launched a carbon gravel bike just before Christmas. In the next few weeks, we're launching a new triathlon model.
Nice.
We're also currently testing an electric mountain bike and a downhill mountain bike.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff we're launching this year.
That's interesting because I was looking at previous guests on the show, Atherton Bikes,
and
I was saying that they didn't have like their own electric bike, but I could see Rachel riding one around like on her Instagram.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the only sector of the industry that's still growing at the moment. The cycling industry is in its worst state ever, apparently.
Really?
Yeah, at the moment. So the only bits that the kind of light is electric at the moment. Yeah.
So it makes sense to go into that. Well, I wish you all the best with
Thank
that.
you very much.
And those who are listening, please go to lios.com to check out what you got at the moment.
Thanks for watching this episode of Screw It, Just Do It. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments below this video. Has this episode helped move you closer to where you want to be? All that I ask is that if you enjoyed this episode and then it's moved you closer to getting to where you want to be, that you share this episode so that it helps one other person do just the same. Just ask yourself what small action will move you forward to get you from where you are, then screw it and just do it. Until next time.